English translation 598th contact. Saturday, the 4th of October 2014, 1442 hours.
Hello, Ptah. Here we are. It was a short correction today. You told me while correcting that you wanted to say something about the timeout we talked about on the 25th of September.
That's right. Because I forgot to mention one more important point for timeouts to take. So I want to make up for this now and mention that there is still a point 10 to be added, as I told you while correcting. So there is no longer work obligation.
Bernadette has already added this as the 10th point to the interview report.
That's what I understood when you told Bernadette.
With Eva, I also correct the corrections that have been made after our correction work, so there is less correction work if the small discussion block that she makes runs through the correction series.
That is a good thing.
According to what we said on the 25th of September about timeouts, a question arose as to what is meant by the 8th point, self-discovery. And since you explained this to me on the 27th of September during your visit again, which was purely private, I explained self-discovery in a short way as follows. A self-discovery is aimed at the person exercising a fundamental self-knowledge and on the one hand becoming clear about what, how, and who he is, basically. On the other hand, this self-knowledge must also make it clear which very own way of life, lifestyle, and life direction are to be worked out and implemented. All false. Bad and negative behavior patterns must be reduced in order to lead a just life in one's own way, and to maintain good and positive interpersonal relationships in dealing with people with rights. In my statement, I did not want to say any more so as not to provoke unnecessary discussion, because I thought it would be better if you could certainly say something more detailed on this subject today, which can then be read.
Of course, I can contribute something to the explanation regarding what has to be considered. So it has to be said that with a self-discovery, all those problems related to one's own person and usually existing for a long time have to be solved and dissolved in a good framework, which represent an insecurity in the way of life, in the way of living, and in the direction of life, as you rightly say. All unworthiness such as selfishness, self-righteousness, and false egoism arise in this relationship, whereby these factors are recognized as a whole and are dissolved by hard learning and self-control and must fall into nullity as well as a rising above others and a self-as-usual assessment than is the case with regard to others.
Unfortunately, in Earth human psychology in general, only a few forms describe what self-discovery is, because obviously psychology etc. does not understand what is connected with it. According to my understanding, the whole of self-discovery is a process by which man endeavors to define himself in his peculiarities, attitudes, habits, behaviors, and goals, etc. So primarily in relation to himself, but also in relation to the demarcation from society and its influences. The development of self-discovery takes place on various levels, namely on a conscious, attitudinal, moral, material, psychological, social, and behavioral level. The whole process goes through different phases, which are shaped by the degree of self-reflection or by the examining and comparative reflection and creation of feelings with regard to oneself and the experience of one's own person, one's actions and behavior, etc. Typical questions that arise are of great importance, such as who am I really? What am I? How am I? And how can I be in the future? As well as who, how, and what do I ultimately want to become and be. Self-discovery can be characterized by emotional burdens and crises, especially when the desired social role and the good and positive living together with fellow human beings is difficult to achieve. Because egoism, self-righteousness, and selfishness, as well as a rising above other people, and the desire to be more valuable than the other, are in the foreground. Unworthy values, therefore, which must be consciously worked on, dismantled, and made to disappear. A self-analysis of one's own motivational structure can be very useful in this case. It should also be borne in mind that the result of a process of self-discovery is a personal value system and more or less detailed planning for the future, whereby the desired goal is usually related to self-realization. In the context of self-discovery, it must also be said that it must be learned and understood that every human being is equal to every other human being, because differences exist only with regard to interests, modes of action and behavior, knowledge, education and occupation, as well as social status and wealth. But these differences do not carry any weight with regard to the value of the human being as such, nor with regard to the treatment, honor, and dignity of the human being, which must always be maintained in every case. So it requires that one's own person is not overrated in any way and not placed in front of others, but is valued equally in its entirety, just like any other person, no matter what education or profession he has, what social class, what religion, sect, or other direction of opinion he belongs to. Further, it has to be said that what I still have to explain refers to self-knowledge in such a way, and also has to be clarified that also the interests, abilities, and possibilities to be carried out for self-realization are taken into consideration and have to be clear. Also, the creational natural laws and recommendations have to be perceived and realized in life if one finds oneself correctly. Also, the learning and implementation of modesty in relation to one's own person is just as important as tolerance towards one's fellow human beings. If, for example, they make mistakes, which they inevitably have to make in order to correct them and learn from them. Also, the modest and tolerant contact with fellow human beings in everyday life is just as much a necessity as all other knowledge arising from self-knowledge and all related factors, which must be learned, brought under control, and realized in life as a whole. That's as far as I have to make a statement. What I said was supposed to be clear. Then privately, I would like an answer as to how I should understand it in a matter that relates to it.
What you have said so well needs no further explanation, and I have to say that I could not have made it clearer. For my part, I did not want to explain the whole thing in as much detail as you have done now, but now I think that it would have been necessary after all. But I can say the following about what you say, but I do not want to do this in public, because it is a private matter. The whole thing has to be viewed and understood in such a way.
It was just a need for me to explain everything a little more precisely, because I thought that surely questioning voices would become loud again. But with that, with what I have explained, further questions might be superfluous, I think. But with regard to the other thing that was said privately, can I mention something about it at today's general meeting if I might be asked about it?
Of course, if the discourse should come to that.
Then again, the matter of time out. If there is a case with us in the FIGU regarding time out, then I assume that the 10 points of justification mentioned by you are to be taken into account.
Yes, what I said is to be understood that way.
Well, then that's also clear, although I think that we should keep the whole thing in this way according to the statutes.
I am sure that such a request will be made by members, so it should necessarily be made that way.
Well, then I guess there will be a need for that. But something else. For my part, I have written 21 important points concerning the FIGU, this very one, in addition to what I said on 25th of September, from which we will make a brochure.
1. The FIGU is not a group or an association that finally gives simple answers to the questions of people searching for the effective truth, or that can experience something special that makes them feel accepted and protected. 2. The instructions given in relation to doctrine are understandable and comprehensible to any person who thinks clearly and rationally, but it takes initiative to implement them personally. 3. The teaching of the FIGU is not aimed at the fact that, as a result of working on this, something could be done for the future in such a way that it can change for the better. 4. The FIGU is not a family, but a free interest group of like-minded people who are all learners and are anxious to get their own life under control in the right way and to acquire a correspondingly positive individual lifestyle. So, old members of the association do not take new members under their wing to address their questions and worries. but are taught that every person must be his own master and build himself up and accept himself in every relationship, and from his own effort and strength. 5. The FIGU is not directed with its ideas to improve the world and mankind, because the teaching is solely directed to the individual person, taking himself by the curb, to build up and develop himself thought, emotion, psyche, as well as love, knowledge, wisdom, and behavior-wise, in the same way as everything is given by the creational natural laws and recommendations, which only have to be perceived, recognized, understood, and comprehended. 6. The FIGU has no master or guru, etc., who would pass on a supposedly perfect teaching to humanity through which redemption and salvation is to be brought. For the FIGU has only one Kunda teacher, who teaches the teaching of ancient knowledge with regard to the perception and knowledge of the creational natural laws and recommendations, as these have always been recognizable in free nature. After the death of the proclaimer Billy Edward Albert Meier, the FIGU core group in the Mother Center, Switzerland, is responsible for the internal and worldwide management of FIGU. 7. FIGU does not fail to teach that humanity is doomed to extinction by falling away from the true doctrine, and that consequently it is not failed to teach that the state of humanity in the world is improved by the bringing back of the true doctrine. For the doctrine of FIGU is directed solely towards the positive building up of the personality, character and behavior, etc., of the individual human being, and solely according to his own motivation, desires, and original will. 8. The teaching of the truth. Teaching of the spirit. Teaching of the life, which is taught by the FIGU, is understandable in its importance to every man gifted with understanding and reason, as well as to people who are open to reality and its truth. 9. The teaching of the FIGU does not in any way assume that earthly mankind is blinded and lost, and consequently does not assume that salvation, redemption, and deliverance is only possible by accepting and following the FIGU teaching, because in principle it teaches only the possibility of building up the personal well-being of man through his correct behavior in relation to thoughts, feelings, and the psyche, as well as the way of life, lifestyle, interpersonal relations, the acceptance of nature, humanity, tolerance, and all human positive behavior values in general. 10. The teaching of the FIGU is not perfect and not perfect, for it is constantly being expanded according to new insights into all aspects of human life, nature, and its fauna and flora, as well as into consciousness evolution, insights from the creational natural laws and recommendations, expandable knowledge and wisdom, etc. 11. The teaching of the FIGU cannot be interpreted as a result of a belief or assumption, but only according to reality and its indisputable truth, which also means that there is always only one truth, which results fundamentally only from reality and its facts. 12. The FIGU teaching is aimed at people discussing and learning from them, because only in this way can doubts and distrust be revealed, discussed, and clarified, but the doctrine must not be falsified by untruths. 13. There is no attempt to convert adversaries or to let them become adversaries of another sense, for their actions and deeds are their business, with which they have to come to terms themselves. 14. When human beings join the FIGU and its teaching, they therefore do not have to separate themselves from family members, acquaintances, and friends, because the FIGU is a free community of interests, in which all interests of the members are and remain completely their own, provided that these are not illegal, criminal, and inhuman or inhuman, etc. 15. In the FIGU there are no rules which are determined by a higher authority and must be accepted without contradiction, because in principle, Rules and regulations are discussed in the FIGU core group and decided only by a unanimity of all present members, while in the passive groups the majority of votes applies. 16. In the FIGU, as in every club, there is a certain order, as there must be in every family if it is to function properly. But this does not mean a principle of unfaltering discipline, which would require an unfaltering obeying of an authority, or allow no mistakes. 17. In the FIGU, private things can be done by the members, whether they are useful or not, and it is also possible to separate oneself from others in order to cultivate one's own interests, so that there would not be a strict order which would allow only one principle of absolute community, because the freedom of the individual human being is guaranteed in every respect. 18. In the FIGU, the time must and must not be given only for the mission. Consequently, this must not only be made available to the FIGU, but must also be used for the private leisure time and for the private life. 19. If members in the FIGU have doubts about the doctrine with regard to its reality, truth, and effectiveness, then these are very well taken into consideration and can be discussed, whereby also the own opinion of each person is considered and recognized, and also everything is thoroughly clarified, without influencing, threatening, or compulsive manipulations. 20. In the FIGU, the rule applies that every person who is interested out of his own interest is not missionized for the teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, and must decide for himself for or against the teaching, whereby it is absolutely released to him how much time he needs for his decision. Consequently, it can be hours, days, weeks, months, years, or even decades, if at all. 21. In the FIGU, every human being is given the importance and the right to spend enough time to learn about something that has been heard or read in the teachings of the Spirit, and to learn about something that has been taught or read in the teachings of the Spirit. Only by really dealing with the teaching in a profound intellectual and emotional way, by making one's own thoughts and feelings about everything, and by opening oneself to one's way of life, one's shaping of life, and one's goal in life out of one's very own interest and will, can one find and make known reality and its truth. Simya Say Silver Star Center, the 28th of September 2014, 1816 hours. Billy, what do you think of that?
Very much, because the whole thing is important, so it should also be summarized with what you said on the 25th of September.
We, Bernadette and I, have already arranged that.
Then I'd like to talk to you privately about a few things.
Of course, as you wish.
Then the following.
One moment, please, because for the time being I have another question concerning the Ebola epidemic, which we already mentioned at the 592nd official meeting on the 27th of July, about 4 months ago. I would still be interested in where the disease comes from and how the viruses are transmitted.
I can explain this to you. The Ebola virus was transmitted from animals to humans, as was the HI virus. In HIV, the small green monkey species were the carriers of the virus. And in Ebola, the first sources of infection were bats, flying foxes, and monkeys. The Ebola virus causes what is known as viral hemorrhagic Ebola fever, associated with internal and external bleeding. Ebola was born from the consumption of wild animal meat and contact with animals infected with the Ebola virus, which continues to be the case. Transmission from person to person is also possible, although physical contact and direct contact with the blood or other body fluids of people suffering from or deceased from Ebola are sufficient for infection. The disease can also be transmitted over short distances through the air, and thus infect people, just as perspiration can suffice for infection if a person comes into contact with it. Certain biting insects can also transmit the Ebola virus under certain circumstances, as can various small and large animal species if they are infected with the Ebola virus. In addition, the Ebola virus can accumulate on objects of all kinds, such as crockery, door traps, toilets, and other things, whereby the viruses can survive for up to 2 months and have an infectious effect.
Thank you. That's it then. So we can turn to what you wanted to say earlier.